Hello. Welcome to this week's episode of the Let Me Ask You This podcast. I am your host, E.B. Hepworth, and I'm so grateful that you're here. I start every single episode off by saying this, and I want you to truly grab a hold of my heart when I say this, but thank you for being here. I am well aware of how vast the internet is and how you could be anywhere, and you're choosing to be here listening to this conversation, and I want you to know I don't take that lightly. This week's episode is with a wonderful, powerful friend, Greta Eskridge. And honestly, you guys, I walked away from this conversation and I was like so fired up. Greta is releasing her book, her brand new book. It's actually coming out this week. It came out earlier this week. We recorded this episode a couple of weeks ago before it was released, but she's releasing a book called It's Time to Talk to Your Kids About Porn, and it is a parent's guide to helping children and teens develop sexual integrity. And we talk a lot about this, how this is a conversation and a topic that is a little bit uncomfortable to breach, right? A lot of us parents are a little bit in denial that, oh my gosh, do we really need to talk to our 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds about this? This is crazy. But let me tell you, we do. It's so important. And if we are not having these conversations here at home, then where are we going to have them? And so I am so proud. I said this to Greta, but it would have been so much easier to not write this book. It's uncomfortable, right? It's so vulnerable. It's like, oh Lord, can I write a book about something else? But let me tell you, I'm so grateful for the offering of this book because it's handing us parents tools and ways to navigate this highly sexualized culture. And oh man, I'm so thankful for the purity of Greta's heart. I'm so thankful for the story that she vulnerably shares. And so this probably goes without saying, but this conversation is centered around, and we are in the car with kids or whatever it may be. I want you to know at the forefront of this episode, that's what this conversation is fully framed around. And so listen with discernment, so then you can have these conversations with honor with everybody in your family. And Greta does share a lot about her story, within her own marriage, the emphasis and how porn has had an effect on her marriage. And so that is so hard to go into. And I can't tell you how many people I sit across a table from that share this story with me. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So my heart is with everyone that is listening to this message that has that a part of their story. Okay. And the last thing I want to say is Greta was so gracious to send me so many resources. We hung up the interview, I should say. And within like a couple hours, she sends me a list of resources that are so incredibly helpful. So whether that's within your own marriage and you're one of your guys' self is struggling with a porn addiction, whether you're not married and you're struggling with sexual integrity, whatever it may be, but she sent a list of resources. And so make sure you go look at the show notes because these resources are going to be helpful. And so without further ado, here is my conversation with my wonderful, powerful, anointed, joy-drenched friend, Greta Eskridge. I don't know if you know this, but Greta is a super up-and-coming name. Oh. Again, yeah, like everyone's naming their daughters Greta again, and like Ruth and Esther, like these classic names. So you're going to probably see a lot of baby Gretas around here pretty soon.
Well, I only ever in my life have met less than 5 Gretas. And I think 3 of them have been in Europe. One was a grandma. Totally. They called her Grandma Greta. And I was like, right. That's me. That's
you. Yeah.
So yeah, now I guess there's going to be lots of them.
So EB is short for Elizabeth, and I have yet to meet any other EB in real life.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of and everybody calls me Ebby, but just to be clear from the get-go, it's EB.
I was thinking it was EB, but I was going to ask.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, everybody calls me Eb or Ebby, and Starbucks, or I get Eve a lot, or Evie.
Yeah.
But, it is what it is. But thank you for giving me an hour of your life. I'm so grateful for my friend. I was just doing your intro and I was explaining what I had messaged you a couple of days ago, where I'm coming into this new arena of book writing. And I felt like I'm walking into the cafeteria with my tray, where can I sit? And I felt like you were just Evie, come sit by me. So I can't tell you how just your warmth has meant so much to me in the last month. So thank you for that. And we are going to shout your book from the rooftops. Okay. And here's the best part is
that's what I want.
Your first
Yeah.
Your first sentence of the book, like, who wants to write a book on porn? I was like, who does want to write a book on porn?
I did not.
Tell me the genesis of I mean, obviously you saw a need, but when the Holy Spirit came and was like, knock, 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 hey, Greta, I want you to write a book on porn. How did you respond?
Well, it's crazy. And I already have tears in my eyes and we just started. That's an indication of where this podcast is going to go.
The best.
I actually first nudge from the Holy Spirit came from one of my dearest friends. Her name is Yana. And it was probably 2 weeks after I found out my husband had an affair and a pornography addiction, both of which were absolutely shocking to me and came out of nowhere. Just for those who don't know, it is very common for pornography addiction to lead to, other unwanted sexual behaviors. So the affair was, kind of an outcome of pornography addiction, both shocking to me, as I said. So we had gone to these dear friends of ours who had walked with us, for years, told them what was happening. And Yana said to me, she said, I hope you write a book about this one day.
You're like, Yana, too soon, homie.
No, I actually was like, yep, okay.
Wow, you are radical.
Like, not right now. But I felt like such a conviction from the very beginning that I wanted God to use our story and I wanted him to use it for good. In the minute, no, I did not feel
of course
I was ready for that. But that was my hope and my prayer right away. It did not mean that I wasn't angry, that I wasn't hurt, that I wasn't brokenhearted, I wasn't struggling. All of those things were true, but I already had a hope to cling to. And the clinging was, Lord, use our story. And now it's been like 15 years. So that's a long time to wait for the book to come out. But here we are.
Well, here's the thing is I think it's Beth Moore that says, you write from a scar and not a bleeding wound. And just tending to that wound. And my mentor always says, sometimes healing looks like keeping the wound uninfected. And what I see even with that genesis of a story is your first knee-jerk reaction was, let's gather. Yana, can we come over? And so what have you felt as far as you are clearly a community-minded woman? How has community partnered with you in the contents of what's in this book?
It's actually been a really hard part of the journey because there is so much shame attached to pornography, infidelity, like all of that stuff, right? And so to be able, especially like 15 years ago, I mean, I remember like I was searching for help. And people in a book. And I felt absolutely alone. Like I felt like there were just no resources. So that's part of also what has, made me want to write this book.
Yeah.
So we really chose to just have a small group of people who were around us.
Yes.
Especially in the beginning, in the thick of it.
Yes.
And everybody chooses to do that differently. That felt best for us. And then over the years, I am a much more public person than my husband. He's much more private. I'm like, let's talk about anything and everything with everyone.
Like, Greta.
All the time. And he's like, whoa, settle down, girl. So navigating like me wanting to like tell our story.
Yeah, that's a big move.
And him being like, could we hold on? And I remember the first time I told him, and this was several years into healing, into restoration. And I said, someday I would really love to write a book and share our story. And I remember his eyes got big and his face got pale. And he was like, I'm not ready for that. And I said, that's okay. Of course you're not ready. Like, I'm not saying I'm ready, but I'm saying someday. And he's like, I don't know if I'll ever be ready. And that felt a little crushing because I was like, man, I feel like this is what God wants to do. But I also
such attention
to listen to the Holy Spirit and I really wanted to honor Aaron in his healing.
Yeah.
And recognizing we heal it on different timeline.
Yeah.
We heal in different ways. For me, writing and sharing our story and helping people with it was healing, but he wasn't there yet. And so that just began my journey of praying that the Lord would open the doors if this is what he wanted us to do, to share that way. And
Yeah.
if not, he wouldn't. And so our community started real small, and then it has grown as we've both healed to now we minister and work in different capacities. Aaron works much more one-on-one with men who are dealing with similar things that he has dealt with, and he ministers to them in a really personal way. And I'm the one who's like on a stage saying, let's talk about porn. So we both have built different kinds of community, but the Lord has allowed us to do it in the way that suits us best.
Something that you talk about, you emphasize the importance in this book of having hope-filled conversations about pornography. What are practical ways parents can model a culture of grace and redemption within their home when discussing something as intense and real as porn?
So I think that it is very common for us as parents to feel fear, anxiety, stress when we think about talking to our kids about pornography.
Yeah. I loved in the book when you were like, I haven't even bridged the tooth fairy and I'm supposed to talk about stinking pornography. I was like, relatable.
Yeah. And a huge part of that, of course, is because we all have some sort of story attached to pornography.
Yes.
And it could be a deep wound that has happened to us because of our own porn use or because of the porn use of somebody else in our life affecting us, a spouse, a parent,
Yeah.
a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or it could just be nobody ever talked about it to us. And so therefore we feel immense fear and stress and we feel ill-equipped, but there's some sort of stress attached to it, some sort of trauma, fear, etc. So then we think, how am I going to talk to my kids about this? And that's where the fear comes in and parenting from a place of fear instead of a place of hope. And I really got that because for myself, I was like, well, this happened in my marriage and this happened to my husband because he didn't have anybody to equip him. I didn't have anybody to equip me to recognize signs in him. And so this is not going to happen to our kids. And I'm like fired up. I will do everything in my power to protect them. We're going to put the force field over our home and over them. And I was parenting out of fear. And it took me years to recognize that. And my response is understandable. But eventually I learned, like, I'm not God. I can't protect my kids from every single thing. And I certainly can't protect them from never seeing porn. I can't protect them from never going back to view porn, or I can't be assured it won't impact their marriages, whatever. I will do everything in my power to give them tools to create a culture where we can talk about it in our family. But when I decided I would parent from a place of hope instead of fear, that did change the way I related to my kids, because then I felt like we could talk about porn, not in a like, this is bad, this will hurt you, this hurts other people, stay away from it, the internet is evil, we're afraid. Instead of just being like, let's have natural, organic conversations about this thing that is not good for you. It's not good for other people. It hurts people. Here are some of the best ways we can stay clear. But every conversation didn't have to be laced with fear. It became a lot more just conversational. Like, it's okay. We can talk about this. I'm not afraid. And if you see porn, that's not the best, but we're going to work through that too. God is in all of this with us. That shift was huge for me. And I think if parents can have that understanding, work through their own stuff first.
Yeah, that's what I just was going to say.
And then be like, okay, just because I have this trauma doesn't mean I have to pass it on to my kids. In fact, by talking about it with them in the calmest, most compassionate, grace-filled way possible, I am not going to pass it on to them.
Yes, I'm drawing a line in the sand.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I have so many thoughts, but when a parent says, okay, I'm going to confront my own battle with my engagements with porn, whatever my history with it looks like, how do they get to a place where they're like, how am I supposed to have hope about this? Where do parents start?
What I always say when I have this conversation with moms, because I often do, is that God is giving them a chance to write a different story for their kids. And so they can't go back and change what has happened to them in the past. They can heal from it, but they have a chance to do something different for the lives of their kids, whether that's being the parent who talks about it with them, or being the parent who forgives and doesn't freak out and heap shame and judgment on their kid, being a parent who does provide protection around screens. If they came from a family who didn't, they get a chance to do things differently. And that is a part of their own healing.
Yeah.
Because
I love that.
a big part of healing is saying, well, I'm not going to repeat these same things. I'm going to do it differently. And so it doesn't change what happened in the past, but man, what an amazing opportunity. God says redemption is, I'm changing the story from now on. And that's what they get to do.
Drop the mic. So good. So good. I'm thinking of how many women I sit across from that tell me your story. They're like, EB, my husband I caught him engaging in porn again. And I feel, and it just the remnants and the shame that accidentally and residue that gets left on them in response to their spouses. And I've had close friends saying, hey, I don't know what to do. My son is 7 and I found this and I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
For the person that is hurting in responses to someone else's decision, or even for a child's maybe accidentally stumbling upon it, what can, and I'm speaking directly to the woman because that's always who I'm sitting across from. What would you say to the woman that's aching in response to someone else's choice to engage?
First, I would just say you're not alone.
Yeah.
It's such a lonely place. It's a lonely place if it's your spouse and you're hurting because of that.
Yeah.
I would say in some ways it's even lonelier if you're a mom and it's your kid. Because when it's your spouse, feels like, yes, it feels betrayal. It's betrayal to you. But I feel like there are more things in place to help a woman who's walking through that. And I have some of those resources that I'd be happy to share with you. You can put in the show notes because we need those resources, but those are in place. But there are far less resources for the mom whose kid is walking through porn exposure or especially porn use because it's newer. You know, I mean, it's just a newer thing that kids are being exposed to and then becoming addicted to pornography. And so there's less in place for them. The community that you need in that moment, it feels like I don't have a community. Who can I tell? Everyone will judge my kid. They'll think he's a terrible person or she's a terrible person. And I don't want that. I want to protect my kid, but I'm so alone. I'm so afraid. Where do I go? And so I would say to that mom, in particular, that woman, you aren't alone. There are many other women who are walking that same journey as you. You can find there is someone who is a safe person. Maybe it is your own mom. Maybe it is a trusted mom at church, a fellow mom. And maybe it is me or you, Evie, someone you could reach out to. Sometimes a stranger feels safer because you're like, you don't know my community, but I feel like a connection is there with you. Find someone and start by sharing. That's the first step because shame wants us to isolate and say, I can't tell anybody what is happening because everyone will judge us. Everyone will judge me. I'm alone. Satan wants us to believe that it'll never get better. I have to hide. So step one is finding someone you can share with, whether it's your spouse that's dealing with this or your kid. Find someone, share. And if they don't know how to respond, because some people don't, and that hurts, but it's okay because this is a big reveal. Move on and find somebody else. And then find some of those resources that I'm going to give you to put in the show notes. Yeah. There are books, there are podcasts you can listen to. There are people who are working in these arenas who can get help to you, whether it's personally through a book, through a podcast, through a video. But shame says hide. And I say we need to instead seek that community, find someone to talk to. That's the first step. So you know the truth is you're not alone. You have God, of course, and you have his people.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah, you're right. Shame always says hide. And then God says, nope, we're opening up the shadows. We're opening this thing up. Yes. Man, something else while you were just talking that was coming to my mind is I was recently sitting across from a mom and she said, EB, my daughter is 10. And she looked at me and was like, my daughter. And she is engaging in watching porn. And she was like, I literally don't know what to do. And there is this stigma that is just a total target on little boys, as if girls have not been a part of the conversation. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience with sharing and engaging in these conversations with your daughter versus your son, like, and how maybe those have changed and varied?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up because that is something that I hear from parents all the time. Moms will say, well, I have 3 boys, so I really need to talk about porn. But then the flip side is sometimes mom will be like, well, I only have daughters, so I'm not really that concerned about this yet. And I'm like, no, don't believe that. Yeah. And I always say, like, for so long, pornography has been viewed as a male problem, but it's not a male problem. It's not a female problem. It is a human problem. Like it impacts all of humanity, whether that's somebody watching it or being impacted by it in the, the reverberations of it. Right. But reality is there is a growing number of girls who are engaging with pornography. And that is not accidental because the pornography industry wants more clients. They want more customers, right? And so if they're leaving girls out of the equation, well, they're missing a large client base. And that sounds horrible to say, but it is the truth. So with the easy access to pornography and pornography that is actually specifically targeted towards female audiences, it's bringing girls into porn. It's especially important to know some things like some girls turn to pornography simply because they're like, well, I need to know what's expected of me in sex.
Yes. Curiosity.
And so that's where they're like, well, this is what everybody watches. So this is where I will learn what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
And that's becoming a real common thing. Also, books that are erotic books that are targeted for middle school and high school girls.
It's wild, Greta.
That's one of the most common ways girls get into pornography is through books. And part of that is because as women, we are more aroused by a relational story.
The fantasy of love is wild for us.
And so the people who are creating pornography, they're not idiots. This is a billion-dollar industry. They're going to find ways to attract those female customers. And so for many girls, that's where it starts. I was speaking somewhere, a year ago, and it was to an audience of parents, but there was a 15-year-old girl in the audience. And as I was saying to parents, one of the things they needed to be aware of was what their daughters were reading, because many girls are introduced to porn through erotic books. And this little 15-year-old girl, she yells, "Amen!" And she fist pumps in the back. And I was like, wow, you're the first person who's ever done that in one of my She came up to me after and she said, "Thank you for saying that. So many of my friends are reading these books and their parents don't even know what they're exposed to because they're just they're reading a book." And so I think that for a mom whose daughter is using porn, that's a whole nother level of shame, because you're like, oh, something must be wrong with her because only boys look at porn. No, girls are too. Every single boy or girl needs to be talked to about porn. And then I haven't even gotten to the question you asked.
No, sorry. I love that. You're preaching. You take over, baby.
I just want parents to know this, because I think so many of us don't. As far as talking about pornography with boys and girls, I have 3 sons and 1 daughter. And in our family, we talk about it with everybody. There are some very specific things we talk about more with me with my daughter and my husband with the sons. But those are really more related to puberty things, because it's what impacts us. I understand her journey in a specific way. He understands their journey in a specific way. But I will say they all know about puberty for boys and girls. We don't keep it hidden, because I think it's really important for my sons to know, what is a pad? What is it for? What's a tampon? What is it for? What's a period cup? They need to know that stuff. I hope they get married someday and they can be understanding and available to their wives. So my daughter needs to know stuff about the boy anatomy and how all of this works. But as far as talking about porn, I really have just practiced a lot of, we're all talking about it together, boys and girls in the same room.
I love that.
In some ways, I think it helps because it normalizes that idea of this isn't just a boy problem. This part of it is just for girls. It's just porn is bad for everyone. It hurts everyone.
So what I hear you saying is this plays into connection as a family. It just opens up that your kids are going to talk about all the things with you. When you can say, okay, sex is not off limits, pornography is not off limits, all of these things, these conversations that we need to engage in these hard topics, underbelly, all of this is connection as a family is crucial, right? And so, and it doesn't have to be embarrassing. It's your baby deer finding your legs and how to navigate this new land, right? And so, but it how you said normalizes, it just, when we can take off the shame that's attached to this industry, it's just so important. It's so important. And the other thing that you said that sparked my mind was, and I told you this a couple of weeks ago, my background is in anti-human trafficking. And so I spent, 10 years in red light districts, and you're talking with obviously women that are being trafficked, but you're engaging with all of these men from all around the world that are coming for sex tourism. And the way it always starts when you're talking with these men, you say, what's your story? How'd you get here? Is that they were lonely. It started with loneliness, which then bled into a relationship with pornography, which then invited them to jump on a plane and go and buy sex on the other side of the world. And it's, and so
I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that, because I think one of the biggest revelations for me in walking through this with my husband is I had no category for pornography use in a man that I admired, trusted, loved, who I thought he was a great dad. He was a provider. He was a good husband. He loved all of us. I had no category for a person like that using pornography. But as I grew in my knowledge of pornography use and where it starts is often, like you said, things like loneliness, depression, anxiety, stress, boredom. And it becomes this tool to deal with, not really deal, but you feel like you're dealing with negative emotions. And then sadly, what can happen with repeated use is it can grow into so many other truly horrific things, right? And so for me, a big part of the story was that having compassion for a person who is doing something that I find despicable, but to still have compassion for them, like that was huge. And so like I could go to a group in front of a group of men who pornography and sex addicts, and I have love in my heart for them. And like, that's unbelievable, but that is
money of Jesus.
That's what God does.
He does. Yes.
So thank you for sharing that story, because I think it's really important for us to understand, for anyone, even a kid who is using pornography, like a child who is exposed to pornography and then returns to use pornography. It's not because they're an awful kid. They're curious or they're experiencing some of those other things, and we need to help them in those areas.
Yes. And what I have found as walking alongside people in that is start with questions. Hey, what's happening in your heart? What's, that question that's been echoing from Eden, where are you? Like, and he's not asking us this he's asking us this. So we ask in relation to our own soul, where are we in relation to you, God? Okay. Well, just like you said, starting to extract the heart of our kids and saying, where are you at? How can I connect with you? And so I'm going to jump ahead and I'm going to roll back, but since we are in this lane, I think it's so important about the church should be the narrator of these hard conversations. And oh my gosh, it's like the congregation like flinches when somebody says porn. You're like, oh man, like give me a blanket, let me hide. What have you seen since, you wrote this book probably 2 years ago and now it's just now coming out. And so in your experience, what role do you think the church should play in the perception of pornography and the conversation surrounding it?
This is a real personal one, because I have found, as moms will say, I want to bring you to my town, my community, my church to have you speak. And then they can't find a church that wants to host me because they're like, we just can't bring that up,
I get it, but also I don't.
Yeah.
I have a hard
uncommon story. It's not just like every once in a while this happens. This happens a lot. And so I think churches, they need to provide a place for this conversation to be had, starting, okay, fine. Don't start with having it from the pulpit, but have like recovery groups for people who are addicted to pornography. Have places where you at least have resources for the mom or dad who comes to you and says, our kid is using porn. We need help. Have somebody who can say, these are some counselors that we trust who have knowledge in this area. Here's a book, and we will walk through this with you. Don't be afraid to have resources. Don't be afraid to have classes available for people who are hurting. And then don't be afraid to bring in a speaker and have someone talk about it, or talk about it from the pulpit and say, hey, I just, heard this podcast about this topic, and I feel led as a pastor to talk about it too.
Yeah.
But I think part of the issue is there are so many people who are using porn in the church
and don't want to. Yeah.
And, there's shame and all those other things. And so we don't want anybody to know. And that includes pastors. And they're terrified because what will happen if the truth comes out? Will they lose their jobs? Will their life be utterly destroyed? Will they lose their credibility? And you know what? The truth is sometimes that could happen. And so that is terrifying for them. And how do they deal with this? None of it is easy. None of it is a simple answer. But I think by starting with, we will provide resources and we'll just talk about it.
Yeah.
For people who are hurt by pornography, that's a great place to start. And maybe we could get to the point where it doesn't have to be a massive fallout when we find out that somebody is using pornography. Instead, we can say, this isn't the end of your story. Yes, sometimes there
take
are
this, my hand. I'll walk with you.
Yeah, there are consequences
Yes.
to using pornography.
Yes.
My husband and I are living proof. And it's not just me who's bearing the consequences. He does too, right? There are consequences, but it doesn't mean that's the end of the story. God is in the business of redemption, and he can redeem even pornography and the other things that can be associated with it. So I think the church, we have to be brave. And it might not start with your pastor being up on the stage and talking about it. It might start with you saying, hey, can we put this book in our church library?
Yeah.
Can I type up a list of some really great podcasts I've listened to? So if a mom comes to you and says, I need help, you will have this like printout that I made for you.
Artillery ready. Yes. Well, that's what I love hearing you say is it's walking with. It's not saying, hey, here's a podcast or go read this book. It's, hey, okay, Greta, we're going to walk with you and we're going to continue to meet with you. We're going to engage in where you're at. It's the withness. That's why he's Emmanuel. He's with us, right? So we get to be the church when we're with them in that, right? I think that is so crucial. I'm thinking of so many scenes. I mean, my first 5 years of marriage was ugly. It was so bad. And I really did think it was going to end, in all honesty. And it was finally the reaching for people being like, okay, I need you to walk in this disgusting mud with me, or else we'll be totally suffocated by this. And it was a swamp. And so it was the people saying we're with you. And also it was vulnerable, obviously shedding out, letting all the like, oh, if you knew what I said to him, or they won't love me, or they whatever. And so letting people see the real you and then actually love you is so healing. And the whole not wanting to bring this into church, man, I struggle with that because I'm thinking of just last week, someone had called my husband and they said, Zach, I am struggling with porn. I'm breaking my wife's heart. And his exact words were, I love God so much. I don't know why my love for him can't stop this. And so what would you say to that person who's just like thinking that their devotion to the Lord, they're confused why their devotion to the Lord is not translating into being healed from this porn addiction?
I think that is a great opportunity to talk about all the ways that God heals us. And one of those is through the incredible power of understanding brain science, because pornography impacts the brain. Like, yes, we know it impacts the soul and it impacts our spirit, our heart, but there is a physical like component happening when you're engaging with pornography in your brain.
Yes.
The chemicals that are being released, a dopamine hit is released, and it is powerful. Dopamine is made by God. It's part of the way our body functions. We need it. It's good. It's not bad. But when it's used in a way that it's not designed to be used, then it causes problems. And so with pornography, there's this dopamine hit that gets released, and it's incredibly powerful. And when it's combined with a sexual act, which is what is happening with pornography, because there's pornography and that dopamine hit, and then that becomes this addictive behavior that is very hard to break. And to say to that person, yes, God can heal you. He wants to heal you, but you might need to get some help with this whole brain aspect.
Yes.
And learning to break those, like just being able to break those patterns. And that's where other things like accountability, having someone you talk to. I mean, there are guys my husband talks to every single day, and they go through these accountability questions. And it is so helpful for those men who are deep in addiction to have somebody. So there are tools that exist beyond praying, Lord, deliver me from this. That does not mean it negates, Lord, deliver me from this. It doesn't negate God, but it brings in all these additional things he's created for healing.
Yes. Gosh, so good. You're preaching. Okay, I want you to explain, in the book, you're talking about a pornified culture. How can parents actively counteract this culture and create an environment that celebrates healthy, God-honoring views of intimacy?
This is an area where I've learned a lot, again, because initially my thought was, right, I'm going to shield my kids from everything pornified, right? We're not going to let any of it into our house and they're not going to see any of it. But then here's what happens. We're driving down the road and a car pulls up next to us at the stoplight and it's completely covered in anime stickers, which are these highly sexual cartoon, women with that, all kinds of stuff, right?
Oh, you're ruining my bubble, dude.
Like, okay, we all look, we all see it, we know what is exactly what's happening. And I could either say nothing, which is kind of feels like the easiest route, right? We're just going to pretend that's not even happening. But instead, I am going to say, gosh, guys, what do you think? Why do you think that man driving that car feels like it's okay for him to put those stickers all over for us to see and everybody else, and for him to think it's okay to portray women in that way? Why do you think he feels that way? And so in that moment, acknowledging a pornified culture exists. We live in it. This guy thinks it's okay to plaster his car with pictures that are wildly inappropriate, that I don't want my 13, 15, 18-year-olds to see. But I'm also speaking with compassion because we don't know his story. Maybe no one has ever told him that treating women in this way, even cartoon women, that it is not okay. It's not honoring and respecting them for their brains and their sense of humor and their creativity that God placed in them. He just thinks that they're, boobs in a butt.
Right.
Maybe no one's ever told him that. And what could we do different so that we are not making those same mistakes? And so I think that is one of the best ways we handle living in a pornified culture with our kids, is we talk about it.
Yeah, I love that.
This is happening. And that could be from a commercial you see where a woman is objectified, or a commercial like I talk about in the book. My kids saw a commercial for Triscuit crackers. I hope they're not a sponsor of your show, because I'm going to say something bad about them.
I don't have any sponsors of my show. I'm a big nobody over here.
Lord. There was a commercial and it was a Triscuit cracker and the tagline was "Go topless," and my kids were like, "That's ridiculous. They're using sex to sell crackers," because they're not morons. They know what is happening. But that's part of the training of helping them be able to recognize that sex is being used for everything, and that they can be discerning consumers of media, whether it's the car pulled up next to us and they're like accidentally consuming that, or they're purposely consuming it while watching a show and that commercial comes on. Instead of just saying nothing, pretending it's not happening, say, "Oh, they're using sex to sell crackers. That's a mistake. And we're going to talk about it. We're going to acknowledge it. We're going to say we're not being tricked by it." That's how we deal with pornified culture. We talk about it. We make better informed decisions about what we're consuming, and we have compassion for people who are making bad choices. And we say, we want to do different. We want to do better.
Yes. Well, and I'm thinking of, how do you tell a counterfeit $20 bill from a real bill? You have to study the real thing. And so if we can teach our kids, okay, let's really know the real thing of what intimacy is. Let's know the real thing of how God designed our bodies to operate. And then when they see it, I love that your kids are like, "What a loser, Triscuit." Like, just so you know, I'm not buying a Triscuit for the rest of my life now. So I am like drawing a line in the sand for Triscuits. But they see it and they're like, "Mom, what are they doing?" And they can recognize it right there because of the culture. Again, coming back to connection, you have formed a connection and a culture of family that's like, we're talking about it. There's no such thing as an elephant in the room when it comes to our family. We are going to go after it all. And that's what I love, how you said sometimes, you accidentally receive it. And so what would you say, what are some things that people can put in, maybe some boundaries, some bumpers in their use of social media to not accidentally trip into something that maybe they've previously struggled with?
Yeah. Well, I think there's lots of different ways to do this. If we're talking about kids, my philosophy
You're like,
is
no social.
wait as long as possible.
Totally.
I really think kids, even in high school, they're just not mature enough, emotionally mature. Like their prefrontal cortex is not developed. And then to put them on social media can be a recipe for disaster. So I really think like post 18 is a great time if you're going to introduce social media, wait till then. It doesn't mean they turn 18, you hand them, their first Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat account and be like, good luck, have fun.
Congratulations, you've turned 18.
You're spending time training and talking about it. They have a plan, and you have, even though they're 18 or whatever, some people are like 18's too late, fine, 17. You have a plan for accountability. My teens all know the password on my phone. They could look at anything that I'm doing on my phone, all my accounts, they could get into them. I have nothing to hide. And to have that kind of transparency and accountability is really helpful for them and for us. Same goes with my husband. He could look at whatever I'm doing. I could look what he's doing. We're not hiding from each other, and same with kids. So I think that's a huge one. And then I think too, like, sometimes you have to say, like, this particular social media, like Instagram. My oldest son is an artist. He uses Instagram to promote his art and to find jobs. Like, it is essential to what he does. And I'm the same. Like, that's what Instagram is for me. I have a great time with my community, but also it's a huge part of my work. So recognizing that, but then saying, okay, well, what boundaries do I need to put in place, and how can I use it well? And having those conversations with your kids. When our oldest decided he was going to have an Instagram account for his art, he talked about, these are the things that I want to do. These are the ways I want to use it well. If you have a teenager who's like, I don't want social media, cheer them on. Don't be like, oh, you're missing out. Like, how are we going to send funny memes to each other? Like, it's okay.
Yes.
Don't make them feel like they have to do it.
Yes.
Let them choose to not have social media.
Mm-hmm.
Or like your husband, if there's a point where they say, you know what, there is too much trash on here. It's too much of a temptation. I'm not going to do it. Support them in that decision as well. And that could be for a time. My husband also doesn't have social media. It causes anxiety for him, and stress. And, I'm like, okay, I support you in that, babe.
Yeah.
I wish you were doing posts like celebrating how awesome I am? Yeah. Sure. But
the birthday
okay.
post. My ego it's okay. We can handle it. Well, and I had a friend on the podcast earlier this season, and he runs an organization called Free by Truth. And his whole heart is that he was in ministry, heavily addicted to pornography and a lot of sexual addiction. And so now he's leading a huge organization that helps walk alongside men and women. And he was telling me on our episode that there's a new setting Instagram just released at the beginning of this year where there's like literally a pornography setting to make, inappropriate images not appear. I don't know. So for listeners, I don't know the exact, you'd probably want to YouTube it, but he was telling me that he was like, I'm so grateful that that's been implemented.
I didn't even know that. I mean, I know like Google and Apple have, like, you can have them, there's a settings where you can help with inappropriate content coming up on your phone. Yeah. But I did not know Instagram had that.
And I don't know if it's just a porn feature, but it's just inappropriate content. And so I don't, but isn't that great?
That is great, because that's something that's really important for parents to know, is that even if you have filters set up on your computer or a phone, they don't always take care of what's happening in apps.
Exactly.
So it might be the Google searches are safer because there's not going to be nude images coming up for your Google search, but in an app, you have no idea who's talking to your kid or who's, like propositioning your kid, because I get those requests. And
Sugar mama. Yes.
And every time I'm like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. What is happening?
I know. I'm like, why do you think I want to be your sugar mama? No.
Yeah. And so if that's happening to me, it's happening to your 17 or 14-year-old who's on Instagram or whatever else. So parents need to be aware of that. I'm going to research that feature.
Yes. And I'll see if I can find it too. So the last question I want to ask you, Greta, is what was the hardest part of writing this book?
Just writing a book is hard in the first place. I will say that.
You did the impossible of writing a book about fighting pornography as a mom. You're so hardcore. I love it. So what was the absolute trickiest part of the journey?
It was really lonely. Writing a book is lonely in the first place. But for me, it was like going back to places that I had felt like, oh, I had totally healed from this. And this isn't hard for me to talk about at all. And then I was like deep in it and learning more. And it brought up hard things and scary things and just the hurt, not even my own hurt, but the hurt of others, because I share other people's stories. So going back through years of messages from people and knowing the darkness that exists in this world and wondering, am I really the person who's supposed to fight this? God, are you sure? I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm just a mom. Like, really? Like, are you sure you picked the right girl?
I love that.
Imposter syndrome that came from that. Yeah, it was lonely because of all those reasons. So there's not one single thing. It was kind of like a package deal of things that were really hard.
Well, Greta, it would have been so much easier to not write a book about how to talk to our kids about porn, but you did. And so I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know that this is going to be the kind of book that I like keep in the trunk of my Suburban and I just hand out because like you said, I'm sitting across from the table engaging in conversations about this. And there has yet to be anything that's specific for kids. And so I'm so grateful that you're giving this offering because we need it desperately. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my goodness. I told you, what a woman of faith. Like I started the episode off with saying, it would have been easier for Greta to not write a book about this, but she still did. And I hope that we all, as we listen to this, take what she shares to heart and that we really, really put this information and the resources in this book to work. So without further ado, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And make sure that you sprint to Amazon, get a copy of Greta's book and use it, read it, apply it, and then bring it to your friend and then your neighbor and then your cousin and then the lady at the grocery store because we need what is in this. And so, yeah, my goodness. What a gift. What a gift to be here feeling like I'm sitting with a friend and I'm grateful for it and it's not lost on me. So until next time on the Let Me Ask You This podcast, thank you, thank you, thank you. We'll see you next week.